Elections will now come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click.
Present.
Rep Cortez.
Present.
Rep Busey.
Here.
Rep Kane.
Here.
Rep Swanson.
Here. Okay, members, a quorum is present. We have one more bill to hear, and the chair lays out. No, actually, we've got more than one, don't we? Oh, okay. The chair lays out House Bill 4128 and recognizes Representative Swanson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Chairman Click and members. As you know, in our electoral college system, a candidate for president must receive 270 votes to win the office. The electors are supposed to represent the people of their respective states, but there are electors who refuse, for whatever reason, to honor the pledge they signed and to respect the will of the people. These are commonly known as faithless electors. In the majority of states, this is illegal. 27 states have procedures in place to prevent this. There have been 167 instances of faithlessness in the country as of 2016. However, Texas has yet to fix this glaring problem. There have been some close calls, even in recent history, where a handful of faithless electors could have completely flipped the presidential election. In fact, in 2000, then Governor Bush and Vice President Gore were only separated by 5 electoral college votes. Although 2016 was not a close electoral vote, there were still 7 faithless electoral votes cast across the country, 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans, making this a bipartisan problem. We saw a small but concerted effort by certain interest groups to lobby electors to cast votes against the ultimate winner. In fact, I would say it was much larger than a small effort. They were getting inundated with calls. In Washington state, 4 electors cast ballots against the will of the voters. This represents a third of their state's electoral college votes. In Texas, 2 of our 38 electors chose to dishonor their signed pledge and cast ballots against the will of millions of voters. A set of interesting articles about these faithless electors, one of whom is in the room with us here tonight, have been handed out. It's very interesting to see what they've said in their own words about what their motives were, what their true motives were, and how long one of them had been considering this very action. In other states, like Minnesota, Maine, and Colorado, their proper procedures correctly ensured that faithless electors had their votes and ability to steal the votes of those placing their trust in them removed, and alternates took their place, ultimately casting votes for the winning candidates. While he could not be here today due to his duties in Washington, D.C., former chairman of the Republican Party, Steve Ministeri, had this to say about the problem caused by faithless electors. Quote, in 2016, this is Steve Ministeri talking, was employed as a senior advisor to Chairman Priebus at the RNC. After the November 2016 elections, I was assigned the task of monitoring electors to the Electoral College to help ensure electors elected from states President Trump won were faithful. I determined that approximately a half dozen Texas electors would not commit to vote for the president. Ultimately, this number was reduced to 3 who refused to vote for Trump. Of those 3, 1 resigned and the other 2 did not vote for the president. There's a definite problem as a result of electors not honoring their oath to vote for the nominee. And again, as I said, the Democrats had even more. They had 5 that did not vote for Hillary in states where she won. I support legislation. Oh, but this is finishing Steve Ministeri's thing. He said, I support legislation to prevent electors from breaking their pledge. End of quote. House Bill 4128 will ensure that electors in Texas properly cast their ballots for the winner of this state's popular vote. In the bill, a faithless vote is automatically nullified, and the elector's position is vacated and replaced by an alternate who will faithfully follow his pledge and honor the will of the people. Eligibility to serve as an elector or alternate is contingent on swearing an oath to vote faithfully and having that vote certified by a majority vote of electors. If an elector is absent or replaced and an alternate is not available, the Secretary of State will appoint the alternate from the lot of the other alternates. If by some strange chance there are not enough alternates to fill the vacated seats, the remaining electors will nominate and select any available trustworthy individual to fill a vacated seat. Members, House Bill 4128 will honor the vote of Texans by ensuring what happened in 2016 doesn't happen again. It is important we get this problem solved this session before the 2020 presidential election, which for all we know could be decided by a handful of electoral votes. Again, this is a bipartisan problem and requires a bipartisan solution. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I respectfully reserve my right to close.
Members, any questions? Okay, we'll begin our public testimony. The chair calls William Green. If you would, please state your name, your position on the measure, and who you represent.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name is William Green. I represent myself, standing in opposition to this bill. I am Assistant Professor of Political Science and Assistant Chair of the Political Science Department at South Texas College down in the Rio Grande Valley. I drove 5 hours up here to testify against this bill because it's that important. I've been teaching on the Electoral College for about 25 years. In fact, my federal government class, in that class last week, we were covering this very topic, why the founders created it, how they set it up to operate, and of course how some people have tried to change it, go around it, and misinterpret it till it's barely recognizable anymore. Of course, it takes me 2 days of classes to teach my students about the Electoral College, and I'm only allowed 3 minutes today to try to explain why this is such a terrible bill and should be rejected. So I don't have time to discuss how the Constitution gives absolutely no authority whatsoever to state governments to force presidential electors to vote for a particular person for president. I don't have time to discuss the fact that attempting to do so is no more constitutional than forcing members of Congress or forcing you to vote a particular way on any bill. I also don't have time to discuss the fact that it is just as unconstitutional to dictate the vote of someone constitutionally qualified to vote for president, just as it would be unconstitutional to dictate the vote of someone constitutionally qualified to vote for Congress. They're just different kinds of electors. In my piddly little 3 minutes here, I don't have time to explain to those of you on one side of the aisle how this bill would violate voters' civil rights spelled out in Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. And I don't have time to explain to you, to those of you on the other side of the aisle, how this bill would create a legal precedent helping those trying to go around the Constitution and the Electoral College. I don't have time to explain to both sides how bad this bill is for your party and for our state and for our country. All I have time to say is, don't fix what ain't broke. In the Electoral College's entire 228 years of operation, as was mentioned, there have only been 167 total out of thousands upon tens of thousands of electoral votes of these, quote, faithless electoral votes. And no so-called faithless elector has ever come close to changing the outcome of a presidential election. In fact, out of 860 total Electoral College votes cast by Texas electors since 1848, there have been only, as mentioned, 2 so-called faithless votes, and that is 0.2% of all of Texas's electoral votes. This bill is attempting to fix a problem that does not exist. Please do not allow 4128 to pass. It is unnecessary, it is unconstitutional, it is anti-civil rights, it flies directly in the face of our principles of representative government. This is the kind of bill that should never even come up in a state as great as Texas. I thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions if you have any.
Mr. Representative Cortez, did
Thank
you
you,
have
Madam Chair.
questions?
Thank you for your time.
Certainly.
Professor Green, correct? Thank you for also driving up here. You said 5 hours?
It is, yes.
And obviously
Yeah.
you've been waiting as we've been on the House floor, so I
Yeah,
appreciate your
just
patience.
a little bit, no problem.
So you were saying that this is a concern because of the potential civil rights violation. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. In Article 2, Section 1, or Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, I'm sorry, it talks about the right of the people to vote for electors of their choice.
Okay.
And it would be as if they have the right, it also includes there, they have the right to vote for members of Congress of their choice. So this would be as if someone in the that was elected as a member of Congress by the voters would get in there, vote the, quote, wrong way on some bill, and be simply removed from office for doing so, not impeached, not gone through any kind of due process, not any of that. And so again, it would be a violation, a direct violation of that part of the 14th Amendment itself.
Of whose civil rights?
Of the civil rights of the voters. Because the voters are the ones who vote for electors. I mean, it's the electors who vote for president. The voters vote for electors, though, and removing who they have voted into office without any kind of the proper kind of due process of impeachment would be, again, a violation there. This is something that has not been debated at the Supreme Court, has not been discussed at the Supreme Court yet. But it's on its way. There are several cases as a result of the 2016 election where electors were removed from, in several states, as has been mentioned, where they have made this illegal to be a, quote, faithless elector. And especially in the 10th
To go
Circuit.
against the majority vote of that state.
To vote their conscience and not vote according to who won whatever. It doesn't have to be the majority vote. Whoever won the vote in the state. Especially in the 10th Circuit, that looks like it's going very favorably for the plaintiffs. So again, one more reason not to vote for this bill is that it is going to the Supreme Court and will be decided there. If anything, take your time with something like this and wait until the Supreme Court actually decides on something like that.
And you've been teaching this subject for how long?
About 25 years.
25 years.
Yeah.
And your solution would be just to leave everything as is?
Yeah, it's not a problem. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The
Okay.
old Texas saying.
I appreciate your input and the dialogue you and I had. Thank you. for driving up
Absolutely.
here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your
Thank you,
time.
Madam Chair.
Any other questions, members? I have a few.
Sure.
You have been teaching this subject, as you mentioned, for a long time. Other states, have they put restrictions or remedies to when these circumstances occur?
Yes, about I think it's 30 states in the District of Columbia right now have these laws, which is why it's going through the court system right now, because it's being challenged as being unconstitutional.
Can you kind of summarize if there's one way in particular that they're handling it? I mean, are they removing them?
It's a variety. That's a good question. Some of them, there's removal as of the elector and replacement with another elector. Some of them, it is a fine that the vote still stands, but they fine them. I think Washington fines them $1,000. Some of them simply tell them you can't vote that way and you have to vote, and they make them change the vote. That happened with one elector last time too. So it's a wide variety of these state laws.
You know, when electors are chosen, it's usually, or it is, at state convention for the various political parties.
In Texas, yes.
At that point, the delegates know who the nominee is going to be.
We didn't in 2016.
Right.
We didn't have a nominee yet, and Ted Cruz was still actively contesting that, yes.
But at least we knew that was a possibility as to who the nominee would be.
Oh, sure, sure.
And in other cycles, we do in fact know who the nominee is going to be. It just, having participated in that process for some time, you know, normally people that are selected as electors tend to be more the party regulars, the cheerleaders, if you will. But in this circumstance, that was not the case. Would that be a true statement?
I think, I mean, I don't know what the background is of every elector that was chosen in Texas, but I think most of them had long time activities with the Republican Party. Yeah.
Right. So,
Most I think, from who I talked to, I think it was around 25, 30 years at least, activism in the Republican Party.
So, if this legislation were not to pass, it would seem that we need to be very careful in who we choose.
Well, always, no matter what, no matter who you're nominating for the Republican Party, you should always be careful who you're choosing. And that includes electors. Elector nominees for the party should always be people that are, have a strong limited government beliefs, strong belief in the Constitution, strong understanding of the Constitution. In fact, I believe in all of the congressional district caucuses at the state convention when they pick delegates and then they pick an electoral nominee, and I believe all of them specifically state that what we want is somebody who understands the Electoral College, understands why it was created, and understands how it works.
Members, any other questions? Thank you for
Sure.
being
Thank you
here
very much
today.
for your time. I appreciate it.
Bill Sargent.
The chair calls Bill Sargent, who I think has already left for the day. We'll show him as registering on the bill without testifying. Chair calls Ed Johnson.
Ed Johnson here representing myself, and I am for HB 4128. So that's the right number? Okay, good. As a Republican precinct chairman and going to many of those state conventions, Madam Chair, as you have, I could see a problem the last time we did this in 2016, and I think this is a good bill to try to fix it. I don't know that you're going to have a perfect solution ever for this problem, but I think this is a good fix because just as you have, electing national delegates to go on to represent you, to represent the voters that have voted a certain way, I think this is a good fix for the problem.
Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair calls James Randall. Please state your name, your position on the measure, and who you represent.
Yes, ma'am. I'm James Randall. I'm here representing myself, and I am for the bill.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee members for being here in this late hour. And thank you, Representative Swanson, for filing this bill. I really appreciate it. I had the privilege of serving as a presidential elector nearly 20 years ago during that famous election where the Florida electoral votes were in question, and which Representative Swanson correctly mentioned a very, very close electoral vote. I was asked by literally thousands of total strangers to cast my vote for someone other than Governor Bush, something I obviously did not do and would have never even considered. Under the law in effect at that time and still on the books, any of us Texas electors could have voted for anyone with no legal consequences. Because the vote in Texas is done by secret ballot, an elector can also vote contrary to the will of the people, and unless he discloses his vote publicly, no one would ever know who the faithless elector was. 2 years ago, I think we know who the two people were. It's all over Wikipedia and any number of articles that you can query. As a previous witness testified, his math is correct. I've done the math too. Since 1848, Texas electors have voted for president, and only 2 electors in 168 years of electoral college meetings have been faithless in nature, whether they were Democratic electors or Republican electors, just depended on which party won the votes that particular year. Well, as you know, there were 2 electors that voted contrary to the person who got the most votes in Texas in 2016. Their actions as faithless electors was legal at the time, but it was an insult to the majority of Texans who voted for Donald Trump. House Bill 4128 will fix that. One of the things that to me is significant about this bill is that it does not criminalize the action of the faithless elector. It simply removes the person and creates a vacancy, and another person is selected by the remaining electors. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think there's any point in putting fines or jail time. Another provision of the bill which I really like is that the Secretary of State would be empowered to be the chair of the meeting. Some of y'all, if you attended that meeting in 2016, you'll recall that it took 4 ballots over a nearly 2-hour period of time just to name the chairman. And that was kind of a waste of time. I think if we put the Secretary of State in and just say you're going to run the meeting, it saves a lot of time. Well, that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Members, any questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, I have James Dickey on the list, but I don't see him present. He registered as neutral on the bill. I also have Tom Glass. I don't believe Tom Glass is still here. He registered against the bill. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 4128? The chair recognizes Representative Swanson to close.
Oh. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members. For those who have not gone through the process, you may think, well, the people voted for who they want. But unfortunately, the way that it works, that we elect electors and even delegates to go to national, we meet, and those who have done this would know very well that we only meet with those people by congressional district one day every 4 years. And many people are new. They may not know anyone else. If they are in a congressional district that takes up many counties, they may have never seen 80–90% of those people before. And so they get there, they believe the person when they've signed the pledge. They think, well, surely everyone's honest. And then they vote for whoever makes a good speech. Or sometimes it's a matter that the person runs for 3 times for delegate, loses every time, loses 3 more elections for alternate. I'm sure you've probably seen this happen. And so the sympathy vote goes for this unknown person who, the poor thing, has lost 6 times. So we vote them in for what people believe to be a ceremonial, just kind of nothing position. So they vote in somebody they know nothing about, and the person is not honest what their intention is. And to take someone who, in this case, there are many articles on the internet to read about this, and one written by this elector. In fact, if you go to his Facebook page, the main thing right under his profile picture is a link to his article he wrote about why he did it. So 2.5 years later, that's still the main point of his life. And a long time history in the Libertarian Party, and it worked for Ron Paul in his election in 1988, I believe it was, and really liked Ron Paul, kept supporting him, and then, but also it became something to teach this. Every semester he talks about how he would teach that you could get away with this and you could do this in a in the Electoral College. And so he talks about that he wanted to move it back, bring the process back into the classroom. So it's like, was this just a thing to prove to students and former students that, that it could be done? Look, I'm doing it. Or then he can talk later in all his classes about how he did it. I find it interesting that in this article about why Bill Green voted for Ron Paul in the Electoral College in the Mises Institute, it says, they quote him in saying, "I am currently writing a book on this approach, tentatively entitled Nullify the Fed. I hope to get Dr. Paul to write an introduction for it. Maybe my Electoral College vote for him will help?" So apparently this was a ploy to try to get somebody to write an introduction to help sell his book. He also says, interestingly, the Electoral College first caught my attention when I worked in support of Ron Paul's 1988 campaign for president. We couldn't even get him on the ballot in North Carolina, except as an official write-in candidate. But I realized that any actual electors who liked what he had to say could still vote for him or anyone else they liked, whether he was on the ballot or not. I sort of tucked this away in a mental filing cabinet over all these years. So this plan's been cooking since 1988. Once I got into academia, this was one of the areas that I actually taught about every semester, so I learned more and more about it. I had been friends with Roger McBride in the 1990s, and he had regaled me with stories about when he was a faithless elector in 1972, voting for Libertarian Party nominee John Hospers instead of Richard Nixon. In parentheses, I still have McBride's excellent book on the Electoral College. Other comments that just seemed like the whole thing was a joke, such as, quote, "I've got free beer wherever I go for the rest of my life." Well, we need to take our Electoral College and not allow people to treat it like a joke. This is who our next president will be, and this should have gotten fixed in 2017. Unfortunately, it didn't. But this is our last chance to do this, and it's a very bipartisan thing. We said the Democrats had more trouble with faceless electors even than the Republicans did. So I say we take this away from somebody who wants to make a joke or get somebody to write an introduction to help sell their book, and let's make sure that the people's will gets done and we pass this bill. Thank you so much. I close.
Members, anybody have any further questions? That concludes our hearing for today. If there's no objection, the committee will stand adjourned, subject to the call of the chair.
Oh, are we going to vote on Phil's bill? Oh,
We can.
I get good votes
Just
on
back
that.
up.
Okay, let's back up then. We didn't gavel in.
No, you didn't.
Okay, the chair lays out House Bill 2640 as pending business. The chair offers a complete committee substitute. Members, this is Representative Cortez's bill relating to political parties. The committee substitute is an agreed-upon bill worked out by both major parties. Are there any questions? If there are no objection, the adoption of the committee substitute. Hearing none, the substitute is adopted without objection. Representative Swanson moves that House Bill 2640 as substituted be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that it do pass and be printed and sent to the local and consent calendar. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click,
Aye.
Rep Cortez.
Yes.
Rep Busey.
Yes.
Rep Kane.
Yes.
Rep Swanson.
Aye.
There being 5 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails. Okay, members, if there's no objection, the committee will stand adjourned, subject to the call of the chair. The chair hears no objection. The Committee on Elections is now adjourned, subject to the call of the chair.